In this next section, we're going to be talking about some of the different ways that you can get on the D-Star network and the different devices that can be used for that, because there has been quite an explosion of devices. One thing I will mention on these new generation of devices, many of them are multi-mode, meaning that they can operate not only D-Star, but they can operate DMR, System Fusion, DPMR, different modes. I think I've even heard some are capable of running P25. So while they will all work on D-Star, that's a possibility to be able to use with a different radio. For example, if you've got a DMR radio, it could also work as well with that. So we'll talk about some of these as we go along here.
I'm going to make the statement here that the folks locally, when we start showing the devices off, they're going to be on a time delay from the rest of the world. So what you're going to see here locally on the big screen is going to be a little bit, we're not going to show that on the screen though, are we?
That's local as well. On that camera.
On your feeds. We got to think about the technicals here for a second, folks.
All right,
Then
we're trying to sort through, make sure you're seeing what we're seeing. Here's an example of different devices that in many cases accomplish the same thing. Either you're talking, let's go with the devices on the left side, lower left, you're talking through a repeater, a D-Star repeater, and so they are talking through the repeater, through the gateway, to the internet. And so if they connect to another user on another repeater, the cloud up there, the infamous cloud, then connects people together through reflectors, etc. Now, there are other devices, each one of these will be going through them to show kind of how they have evolved over time. And I want Robin to jump in on some of these as well. This kind of all started with the DVDongle, which is a device that was developed by Robin's company, Internet Labs. And there are different versions now that are out, but the DVDongle was a way that you could plug this little blue box into, via a USB cable, into your computer. And either using the internal mic and speaker or hook up a headset to it through the sound card. You could connect via the internet to repeaters, to reflectors. So without a radio, I was able to talk on my local repeater, through a reflector, or connect to any repeater around the world. So this was a great device to say, I don't have to have a radio. And remember, in the early days, one of the arguments was that D-Star radios are so doggone expensive. Now, we've found out that's not necessarily the case anymore, especially as some of the models are lowering down in price. I think we've seen some as, they're not the Baofeng $35 radios by any means, but when you've seen them just over $200, that's pretty nice. The DVDongle, I think, can you remember what was its original price when it went into the market?
$199.
$199, I think is right. So that's when radios were costing $500, $600, $700 or more.
How much do they cost now?
The radios?
Yeah.
As low as $230. Well, no, I think they were
and high as $500, $600, $700.
Yeah.
Okay.
So we've seen a lot of price changes, but back in the early days of D-Star, this was a great way to get on without a radio. I think when I bought my first radio, I also bought a dongle, because I wanted that when I was traveling and sitting in a hotel where I wasn't in range of a D-Star repeater.
So we have come to the realization that we've got a little projection problem getting the right stuff in the right spot. So I can show to the online and I can show locally, but it's going to be two different feeds. I got to do that on.
Okay. Then what you're seeing up here is the little blue dongle. It has a USB port. It connects into your laptop or desktop, whatever computer. and then gets its power over the USB and operates. You access the network. Now, there's some new devices that are out that have been successors to the DVDongle. One is DV. There is a new version of the DVDongle called the DV3K, and for some reason I don't have a picture of that one.
Here's one.
It's down to the size of basically a thumb drive or a memory stick. Just plugs directly in. We had it on my camera here. Okay. So the
Use the headset.
The next thing that came along, this also a product from Internet Labs, was the DVAccess Point. And what this allowed you to do is kind of untether from your laptop. And it is, they took out the vocoder chip and added a little very low power transceiver,
GMSK modem.
a GMSK modem, and therefore you took your radio, you connect the DVAP by USB to your laptop, connect to a reflector. Well, you don't even have to do that. There is some software that runs on me. I know when I was traveling a lot more, set this up in a hotel room. I could walk around the room. I could go down the hall if I was. Started seeing the Raspberry Pis coming along. You could also connect your DVAP to a Raspberry Pi and let it serve as the computer and the software for the linking function. I'll get to
So here's an example of a device. This is a case. You see in here the DVAP, the red DVAP. Underneath here is a Raspberry Pi. And this is a case, it's the DHAP Mini, made by a hardened power system that pulls it all together along with the batteries to make just a really nice little portable configuration for use. Here's another setting that John has where he's basically put all these together. There's a Raspberry Pi case in there and everything else, including the battery pack. So basically, he can just turn this on and make it run at this point in time. There's another version of the same thing over here. This is a Raspberry Pi display and a Raspberry Pi display case. The Raspberry Pi is inside the big bulk in the back of it, and you can see the DVAP connected onto the back of it. All different versions of the basic exact same configuration.
When we originally started with the DVAP and would go on the road like you're driving to Dayton, driving to Orlando, Hamcation, you wanted the smallest computer you could get. So this is my little Acer that I had. I would stick it in the back seat of the car. You'd see it connected down there to my Verizon MiFi card to get internet, and then the DVAP is connected over on the right side. And I'd be going down the road, and here was my hotspot, and all the way to Dayton or all the way to Orlando. It was easy to then have my HT up front and easy to talk all the way to and from. We've come a long way, because once we started using things like the $35 Raspberry Pi, simple little Linux credit card size computer, we could connect the DVAP to that, and therefore I started coming up with a different configuration. See if I've got one. Here's the DHAP. And what that's doing, that Ed just showed you, underneath that yellow case and underneath the DVAP that you see is a Raspberry Pi. And they packaged this from Hardened Power Systems, and they even put places for batteries in the flip part of the lid, so it can be totally self-contained, made for a nice little setup. And there were two versions of this, one that had the DVAP and another one, which we'll talk about, that holds another device that connects to the Raspberry Pi. Along came the DVMega, which was a daughter board, and it provided the DVAP functionality, but it plugged into that I/O connector of a Raspberry Pi. So if you looked at, it just stacked on top of it. So with your Raspberry Pi, you'd usually put in a little dongle, a little Wi-Fi dongle, so it could seek out your internet connection. You have an SD card with a Raspberry Pi. Other versions out there, and it's pretty much self-contained. What you see on top of that, on the lower version of that, you can barely see a little SMA connector, that little gold connector at the top left of the DVMega. So I found this little case from MCM Electronics. It held my Pi 2, not a Pi 3, Pi 2, and everything would fit in that except for that SMA connector protruding up through it. So I very carefully, for about 30 minutes, tried to find the center of that, drilled a hole just the size of a little rubber duck, and screw that in and show my, in the case. Doesn't have the antenna attached, but there's my DVMega on a Raspberry Pi. Put it on the pad.
Put it on the pad.
As the DVMega board, which is just a couple of inches square, maybe a little less than that. And it provides the connectivity underneath that the Raspberry Pi did. However, it gets its internet connectivity via Bluetooth. So I can take my smartphone, link it to it via Bluetooth, and that gets its internet connectivity, and I can run it. Again, this is one of the devices that can run in multiple modes, D-Star, DMR, Fusion, P25, et cetera, et cetera. Here's the link showing on the slide where this is available. And they make some cases for it that make it into a nice little package.
Speaking of cases, one thing that we didn't show off with the DVAP is
several of the other products. They'll certify on one or the other, but it's fairly expensive to do both protocols for certification. So make sure you support your manufacturers that have done the appropriate certification.
so expensive is what, $100?
Several $1,000s.
So that works out well. I did get a note that I talked about Moencom and Jim Moen. He's still around in the D-Star community, but I understand his business closed at the end of 2016, so I'm not sure whether his products might still be available or not.
There is a replacement for very similar to that coming up today, is the MMDVM project. It does very, very similar to the Moencom, except that it's a multi-mode board. Supports Fusion, D-Star, and DMR. So that's becoming a new equivalent. They've gone through, they've got one board available today. They're going through the board, a couple of iterations on the board. First of the year, they had gotten their new board in, and they were making sure it's all working before they start putting that board out. So that's another alternative. And the Moencom and the MDVM both work great as hotspots. Those boards also can be utilized to turn a FM repeater into a D-Star repeater. There's one example of the folks out west, especially with Bridgecom, of taking a Fusion repeater and making it a D-Star repeater. Yeah, that's been done. So these devices you can hook up to existing repeaters. Could even be Motorola repeaters, in which you take a really great piece of hardware, those Motorola repeaters, and you can make them now do D-Star. Europe does a lot of this.
We do need to clarify one thing, though. D-Star, as the protocol, specifies 6 1/4. When you add a modem to an FM transmitter, you are no longer following the protocol. So you can say, well, it does D-Star, it gets me in the D-Star world, but it does not fit that 6 1/4 kilohertz. A lot of the guys that were building some of the hotspots that would use an FM transmitter wondered why some of the newer radios would not decode, and that's one of the reasons why. The radio sees an FM signal and auto-detects to FM because it's looking at that wide RF, where D-Star is looking for the 6 1/4.
Yeah,
So you got to be very careful with that, because when a coordinating body, if they give you a 6 1/4 channel and you build a homebrew repeater using an FM transmitter, you're going to be occupying outside your bandwidth limitations.
Yeah, keep in mind that when you have a regular FM radio, let's say you picked up a Motorola Mobile or using an FM transceiver that you can connect to, that it's set up for the wider deviation, and you really got to manage the audio levels. I've seen people try to connect to a commercial mobile radio, and then they say it won't decode D-Star, or I can't get through it, and it's usually level sensitive because you've got to cut it way back down so that the deviation is reduced to that point.
So one thing that Icom has kind of done under the covers, not a lot of people necessarily realized it, is as we showed the different models of radios over the years, those radios not only get new features, but the radios themselves became a little bit better because those radios start hearing better. So they're able to fine-tune the receivers, fine-tune the D-Star portions of them. So the radio that Robin has, the ID-91, I have that, and I can sit it up next to a 51. And there are many times where the 91 doesn't really see a signal, and the 51 picks it up, thinks that it's full quieting. So
It's interesting. I've seen the opposite.
You've seen the
with that.
opposite? Okay.
Yeah, they narrowed the bandwidth in some of the newer radios so that if they didn't meet the specification of D-Star, the signal didn't come up.
Yeah, but if you meet it, generally I've heard it a little bit better is from my side. But there are a lot of things going on underneath the covers in the radios that are not necessarily features that you see. But they've been getting better over the years, which has been really nice from what I've seen.
Another one of the D-Star devices that we'll show today is the OpenSpot. This is a little different device in that it's kind of standalone. It will do the different modes. It has a web interface, so it actually just connects to Ethernet.
So, yes, it is very different from everything else that we've seen. The only way it gets its network connectivity is over an Ethernet jack. So it doesn't necessarily play well when you're mobile, but you can get Ethernet adapters. Generally, I kind of hear them called as gaming adapters that allows you to hook this up to a hotspot. So your cellular or just a device, whatever, you can hook it up to the wireless over that. But the device itself just has an Ethernet jack in it, and it's got a web interface that you can go in and control it, do things as well as listening to the commands from the radio.
So you're really seeing a lot of the multi-mode type devices. One that was introduced just early last year was the DV4 Mini. It's sold through a company in South Central Florida, Wireless Holdings. They were an exhibitor. They've been an exhibitor the last couple of years at Orlando. This is a USB dongle type device, but it is more in line with a DVAP. It has a SMA connector on the outside of it, so it actually is transmitting RF. This is a device that if you're into some of the different flavors of digital, including on the DMR side, into the Brandmeister connectivity for that, then it is able to do that as well. And it does have a little bit more powerful transmitter. It's
100.
You don't think it's 100?
They're using the same chip.
If they're using the same chip, then it's probably a 10 milliwatt. That's probably a typo then.
Or typo, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, the chip that's used is the same one in the DVAP, and it's rated at 13 milliwatts. And once you go through filtering, if you have filtering in your product, which some of these don't, you typically lose about 3 dB, 2.5, 3 dB. So that's why we spec 10 milliwatts on the DVAP.
I believe you have something you want to show.
So
Do I?
let me just make a statement right quick. So one of the things that you would ask yourself is, what's the difference between all of these things? Well, to some degree, they're all pretty much the same. Some of them have additional features. Some of them a little bit different type of things. But the most important thing that I think about showing all of these is the rich environment around D-Star. So these are all made by manufacturers. Yeah, let's get it right. These are all made by hams for D-Star. These are regular hams like you and me that have now decided to take some of their knowledge and put together a product and sell a product. So these are hams developing these things for D-Star. And look how many different things there are out there in the marketplace for D-Star. That's how rich this market is. And a lot of these are brand new items. They've only been around for a few months at this point in time. So there's a lot of rich development, rich experimentation going on with D-Star.
Ed, when you throw around the word rich, does that mean Robin got rich?
Would I be here if I were rich?
All right, any questions on these devices, or did we get any from the internet along this line? Any questions from our audience? We'll check and see if we've got some other questions along the way. Before we move into our next topic, if you have any other questions on any of the previous subjects that we've discussed, now's probably a good time to ask that. Any other questions? Dale in the back there. You have a question too, Leland? Okay, we'll get you next.
And so while we're going there, the folks on DRET, sorry, John wasn't able to read my screen, so we're going to be trying to get some questions in, a little bit of some of the other questions as well.
Oh, hey, John, it's Dale, KD4CVR. One area that's kind of been overlooked maybe to a little bit is the HF aspect of D-Star. I know KQ4KK sitting on the front row, and maybe he'd give a preamble as to D-Star is also communicated across HF bands. I'm not sure most people know about that, but you know, there's activity that goes on there for information.
That's a very good point. We do have in our audience Kent, KQ4KK, who once you started having a couple of radios coming out, like the 7100 and the 9100, that not only did D-Star on the VHF, UHF, and the 1.2 bands, it also could transmit D-Star on the HF bands. It's quite a wide mode, really, compared to like single sideband at 2.5, 2.8 kilohertz, because you're actually getting that 6 1/4 bandwidth from that as well. So it's probably got the bandwidth similar to an AM signal, but it's been a fun mode to experiment with. And Kent, being one of the innovators, come on up here, Kent. Come on, we'll get you. Kent started an HF net, and I'm going to let him talk a little bit about it. Come on up here.
Hi, everybody. I'm KQ4KK. My name is Kent Hufford. About 5 or 6 years ago, Icom came out with the 9100. And the 9100, we found out from a couple people like WW6 USA, Larry, and Mark from HRO. They were experimenting. I heard them on 30 Charlie talking about switching on HF bands. I got on there and I said, what's going on? Well, the 9100 will talk on HF D-Star, simplex. No repeater, no internet, no reflector required. So I got myself a 9100 and I was hooked. So since then, we've been having a D-Star HF net 3 times a week. The Icom 9100 with the D-Star chip in it will do D-Star on HF from 160 all the way through 440. The 7100 out of the box does D-Star on all bands. It's a great D-Star HF radio, as a matter of fact. Flex, the Flex radio, the Flex 6000 series with a USB port, and Northwest Digital's thumb drive. You plug a Northwest Digital thumb drive in the back of a Flex 6000 series radio, and you have another manufacturer with a D-Star HF radio. And if you put a transverter on a Flex or on the 6700, it does 2 meters or 440 out of one of the Flexes. So there's a third producer of D-Star radios. You just have to plug a thumb DV in.
Ken, one question for you. We talk about simplex. What's the farthest simplex HF communication you've made on D-Star?
Australia, Japan. This is from South Carolina. Australia, Japan, South Africa, Poland, Norway, England. This is a couple years ago when the bands were open. Today, the bands are not open.
Confirmed QSOs?
Yes. And currently, the way the bands are on the nets, we usually can talk from South Carolina to California and Washington State, either on 20 meters or on 17 meters. one time during the week. So we can talk coast to coast. We can talk to Saskatoon. Anybody know where Saskatoon is? We talked to Saskatoon, a D-Star station there. So D-Star, it's 6 kilohertz wide. It's about the same as AM, and you have to be careful where you find yourself. So I use the flex, I use the waterfall to make sure I don't step on any AM stations or sideband stations. Find an opening, because D-Star HF doesn't do well with sideband or AM. We lose, they win. But it's a lot of fun. It's just something else in the kit. And when the internet's down and everything's down, you can still talk D-Star HF.
Have you had any issues with those that are on sideband or AM telling you guys to get out of their band, or how do they play?
We try to stay out of it. Every once in a while, somebody will send us. I'll get an email. Maybe in the last 5 years, I've gotten 3 emails and said we accidentally stepped on somebody. Well, it was an accident. We try to stay away from them.
It's kind of funny in contesting. You hear, this is my frequency. I've been here all day. And the thing is, with HF propagation, you might not hear them; they might hear you. So this is my frequency is kind of a myth there with HF propagation. But you guys have had a lot of fun with it, haven't you?
It's a lot of fun. It's interesting. And if you're hard of hearing and you gave up HF, D-Star HF is the way to go, because it's totally silent until you hear the station. What does it sound like? Well, it sounds like D-Star. When it breaks and starts decoding, it sounds like you're talking simplex across the street on 2 meters D-Star. It's pure and clear, pure sound.
Yeah, that was
When
shocked.
is your net, and how do you get on it?
At D-Star-HF-info.com is a website. We have net tonight at 7 p.m. Eastern, and then Sunday at 10 a.m. Eastern and 7 p.m. Eastern. So it's twice on Sunday and once on Saturday.
And it's all listed on dstarinfo.com under Nets HF.
And it's all listed on the D-Star Info website. It's a lot of fun. It's just something else to do. But if you have a 7100, you should try out D-Star HF. It's a lot of fun.
Kent, I was shocked when my first contact was on 15 meters, and it was to WW6 USA in, where is he, New Mexico? And
he's in the Tularosa Valley in New Mexico.
And all of a sudden I'm hearing this, I'm thinking HF. I'm thinking I'm going to hear an HF single sideband signal, and all of a sudden I hear this nice, clear, the noise gone away.
WW6 USA.
I wouldn't call Larry's voice clear, but yeah.
Well, as much as a 6
It's
can be
distinctive.
that way.
It's distinctive, yes.
But it was a lot of fun, and try it if you've got one of these radios. You know, also, I tried it. I had a non-D-Star HF radio that I used, one of the GMSK modems, and actually got it working on HF as well. So.
Well, it is. It's a Yaesu D-Star radio thanks to a DVDongle and a GMSK modem. Any other questions on D-Star HF? Thank you for your time.
So as John's getting back to his seat, we've got a question here or a statement from DRATS. So I know John, when he was in college, did a lot of radio station in college. So I think this question is just perfect for him. So from W4HBS, John Davis has the perfect face for radio.
I resemble that. Brett, I'll get you for that. I know who W4HBS is. We had one more question. Leland?
Yeah, this is Leland Ford, K9SDR. The Icom ID-51Plus2 sounds like it's just firmware upgrades. My question is, can I upgrade the firmware in my Plus to a Plus 2 and not have to buy another radio?
I wish it was just that simple, but along with the firmware update, there's been a memory update from what I've been told. So it takes more room for the operating system to be loaded into it. So unfortunately, there's not a firmware upgrade path.
Was there another question? Larry, did you still have a question? Okay. Any more questions before we move into the next section?
So will there be a 51+2 Mark G?
Well, I know what's on the drawing board, and you guys will just salivate, but I can't release that information yet.
I'll get you back here in a minute.